Good afternoon. Yes, I'll keep this brief. We've got a wonderful panel. Again, Dean Orton, my privilege to be the president for Twin Cities in Motion. 5 years ago to this event, Twin Cities in Motion made a decision to create a new division, a non-binary division. And we were the first to do that. Before Boston, before New York, we knew this was an important decision. But we also know that it's not just one decision and we moved on. It's a much larger commitment, and today is just a part of that we really wanted to continue to have the kind of conversations that are important. Being best in class, certainly it is all about making sure water stops and safety, but it's also to be best in class, it also means to be inclusive and to really be that human spirit of having the full community represented, engaged, feeling welcome on all different fronts. And so for us, that's a larger commitment, and today is just, I'm really proud of just introducing this panel, having you here today. And again, thank you for being here for this important conversation. We hope you have a wonderful time in St. Paul. And again, have a really great weekend celebrating what is a 40-plus year tradition that not only is the best in kind of running, but it brings us all together in just an amazing way with over 300,000 spectators cheering us all on, and it brings out the best in us. So for us, I hope you enjoy it, and please enjoy this conversation. I know I will, and I know our staff will as well. So thank you. With that, I'm turning it over.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to stand up, I'm not very big. My name is Jana Shortal. I am a reporter and show host for Kare 11. That's the local NBC station here in the Twin Cities and the greater metro area. I'm also a huge fan of the running community that has been built here over time. The Twin Cities Medtronic Marathon is excellent. If it's your first time, welcome. I know it won't be your last after this because the course speaks for itself. The fans are second to none. And it's just a beautiful community to be a part of. And having said that, I'm really excited about this panel. I was excited about that the Twin Cities Marathon kind of said we're going to do this 5 years ago, because for a lot of us that are runners, were runners, I know when I was running competitively, the category that identifies with how I identify in my gender was not offered to me, not at any race that I ever went to. So I think it's a long time coming and a beautiful thing, and it doesn't mean, oh, there's only just this many people in it, because wait till next year and wait till the year after that. Because as people begin to feel comfortable that the marathon does more than it just says we have a category, but that your category is celebrated, that it is welcome, that is cheered, and we want you to be a part of it, that's when you will start to see, I believe, this marathon be the destination marathon for our community and every community around. And so I'm so excited about this panel. I'm going to have people introduce themselves and say who they are, their preferred pronouns, because I think they can describe themselves better than I can. So we will start with you. And we have two Micahs. So because you're runners, you're extremely bright, and you're going to be able to keep them apart in your head and what they do. But I'll start first with Micah, and we'll end with Micah, and you figure it out from there.
Hey everyone, my name's Micah, Helle, they, he pronouns. I am here representing Team Queer Space Collective, a charity team. It's an intergenerational nonprofit working to pair young people with queer and trans adults in the Twin Cities and in St. Cloud as well. I'm here representing the average runner, trying to hit 8-minute miles, and I'm really excited for this weekend and excited to have a non-binary category to run in.
Shout out to the average runner.
Another average runner, below average actually. Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Hicks, and I'm the event marketing manager for Brooks Running. Excited to be here. I manage all of our sponsorships and event activations for our brand. Before this, I founded an organization called Black Girls Run, which is a national running group. Thank you. So excited to be here. I've been passionate about running and inclusivity in running for almost about 15 years now, so definitely excited to be a part of this panel.
Good afternoon. My name is Andi, Otto. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Twin Cities Pride, that little tiny festival that happens once a year. That would be me. I'm beyond excited to be here as we start to venture into welcoming these categories into races like this one. And so it's so beyond important that we're here and that our community feels as though they are loved throughout this whole entire run and the whole entire year.
My name is Micah Meyer, he, him, and I'm a Brooks Run Happy advocate who's based in Minneapolis. And I have been working at the intersection of LGBTQ plus advocacy in the outdoors and athletic space for about a decade now. And during that time, I have earned my fair share of haters. And one thing they always like to say to me is, no one's stopping queer people from going into the outdoors or signing up for a marathon or doing an athletic event. Just go. And to that I say, no one is stopping you from going to a gay bar. Just go. And so of course, there's a difference between being legally allowed to going somewhere and being invited and made welcome in those spaces. And so I work with brands and organizations to help them improve, making sure they're not just saying anyone can come here, but actually welcoming people, especially those who have been traditionally left out of those spaces, to see themselves in those places so that they can take part.
And with that, Micah will finish the panel. Damn. Well done. All right. So on that note, you bring us into kind of the biggest overarching question, which is that one that often comes from naysayers or from people who just don't know if we are allowed to come into this community, if we can enter this race, why does this kind of conversation even matter? What does it mean to be inclusive to the LGBTQ plus community, to the larger running community as a whole? Actually, I'll start with you. You drove the farthest.
Okay, I did. I think that inclusivity is really a lot about representation. It's, and from a brand's perspective, it's, do your products, do your branding, all of your marketing materials represent the community, or does it just represent just like one subset? So that's one thing I have been really proud of, and being a part of the team at Brooks, is that we don't want to just be performative. We want to make sure that in all of our branding and all of our marketing, and our events and our Run Happy advocates, that we are being inclusive of what America really looks like, and everyone that's included, and especially the LGBTQ community.
That makes sense. And Micah, since you are running in that division, it must matter to you to be able to enter into it. So speak to us from the perspective as a runner who now has the option to run the way you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a lot of people, gender identity, being a man, being a woman, trans, non-binary, that is such a core aspect of somebody's self-concept. So to be able to enter into a race where you are not only seen, but you're validated and you're respected, you're able to show up for yourself. And I think when we talk about showing up for other people, it's really hard to show up for other people before you can even show up for yourself in the first place. So I think having this platform to run in the non-binary division, it's a chance to show young people who maybe are later in their lives and thinking about their own gender, what's possible. And it's an invite to have them get out onto the race course and have them, enter into this sport without fear of discrimination.
And maybe into the sport, maybe what was keeping them off running in this race was the very fact that they weren't seeing a category that represented who they are in their core. We're going to get to maybe the ouchy topic for probably what no one is thinking here, but certainly happens outside and on that dark side of the web called social media. Micah and Andi, I'm going to give you this one. That's fine, Twin Cities Marathon, if you want to have these categories for trans runners or non-binary runners. But don't think that if they're very good, they can replace the first place finisher in the male or the female category. You just stay over there. What do you think when I say that?
Well, it's interesting because I'm seeing a lot of talk about this right now, about folks saying, well, those non-binary runners took away my spot. Or people are saying, well, what if men lie and they say they're non-binary because they can't get into Boston, so their time doesn't qualify them for Boston in the men's category, so they lie and they say they're non-binary. And what I always find so interesting about this conversation is the industry is punishing non-binary people for the actions of straight men who lie, or punishing non-binary people for
I'd just sit with that for a minute.
That was really good.
Thank you.
Well,
Continue, sorry.
I just find it fascinating that everyone is just crapping on non-binary people for trying to exist. And I find it so fascinating that oftentimes the fears that they have nothing to do with the actions of non-binary people. They're always the actions of cisgendered people and how those people will misuse this opportunity for non-binary people. So I think we should really focus on who we're creating this opportunity for, and if we're actually supporting them or if we're just freaking out about what other people are going to do as a result of them existing.
Keep going. I mean, I think that is applicable to all aspects, right? Andi, as we talk about, I know in my work as a journalist, you know, what am I doing here? Or what are we talking about here? Do I have to appease people that want to make any of us less human and then calm them down to say, no, we just want to run too? If it's a category for non-binary people, if you're not non-binary, then don't flip and worry about it. Right? And but that's scary, I think, too. If I'm 18 years old, which is how old I was when I started running in races, and I see there's a space for me, and then I see other people are mad about it. I want that space for me to be so welcoming that it drowns out those other voices. And so how do we create that kind of community here for our marathon, Andi?
Yeah, I think you were reading our social media when you looked.
It's yours or mine. They're kind of interchangeable.
One or the other. You know, I think that there's two things to that, and part of why Twin Cities Pride got involved in this Rainbow Mile, it's so that every person who's running that mile, if they don't feel loved any other place on the run, they will sure feel loved in that mile, right? That's where we're going. And we need to make sure that our community, and that includes our allies, show up every single time so that those runners feel validated, right? And like Micah said, it's all the other problems and all the other people who worry that non-binary folks or trans folks are going to take over. We're not. I will tell you, as a trans man, I mean, my goal is not to take over that. My goal is to participate and live my most authentic life without being that person who stops in the morning and says, am I dressed appropriately? Am I showing too much? Am I looking too much? Is someone going to judge me? What's that going to look like? And so if we have categories like this where we can feel the ability to live our most authentic lives, that's really what's important.
Ashley, your work with Brooks already speaks for itself, and walking the walk, running the run, if you want to say it in this audience. What can any race organizer at this convention learn, or anybody here for this weekend, what can they learn about not just saying we have a category, because that's not enough. That's tokenization to a lot of people. What does it mean to actually have the category and assure me as a runner that I'm going to be safe in your running community?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I think for us, it's about one, just understanding what it is that people are asking for, right? Like when you know, a lot of times, like, people are like, hey, this is how I want, these are my pronouns. Are you able to honor them? This is who I am. Are you able to honor that and create a safe space? So I think that that's a big part of it. I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, it does.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you as well, Micah, because you again entered into this race. It's one thing if you saw a flyer, right, that's inviting you to come somewhere. Micah, you talked about this too, and it's like, well, that's really nice, but can I trust it? What is the difference between an organization, a race, saying you are invited, and what has to come after that for us, the runners, to say we feel safe coming, we believe you, that really it is inclusionary, you're not just doing this for local political points?
Yeah, I think it really takes a village to create an inclusive space, and part of that is learning to lead and learning to ask and lean on others who are experts in the space, looking to like queer, trans, running groups and bringing them into the conversation about how do we make this environment more inclusive to our runners. And I think that's a great start, just knowing that you shouldn't be creating these spaces alone, but you should be really leaning on the expertise of other people.
And that's kind of where you're saying you came in too, Andi, with Twin Cities Pride. Twin Cities Pride isn't just going to show up if it doesn't think this is legit.
100%. So you know, we get asked to go a lot of different places, and we really look at the intent behind it, right? And when they came to us and said, this is our vision, how can you help us? What do you see? And it was really, like you said, Micah, pulling in the people that have the knowledge and relying on them. And so I think one of the things that is props to the organizers of this, because they reached out and said, this is our vision, can you help us? And without a doubt, we jumped in and can't wait for it.
Micah, you travel, and so you probably see examples of all kinds of different communities within the communities of running. In your kind of anecdotal expertise as you go around this country, what do you see, if you could name the couple of things that the running community could do to be more inclusive?
Well, to put it succinctly, right now it's bleak. The three largest industry gatherings for the running industry in North America this past year, not a single one of them had a queer person, a queer topic, or even any queer terms in their entire programs. And that's really scary for us as people, but it's also just really dumb for the organizations, because 7.2% of all American adults identify as part of the queer community. That's according to Gallup in 2022. 10.5% of all millennials and 20.8% of Gen Z identify with this community. So that's over 1/5 of the largest market in America that the running industry as a trade organization is ignoring. And so that's terrifying to me, that even with that demographic strength, this history of sort of queer phobia is so strong that we are being ignored in that way. So I think the most important thing that we can do right now is just provide representation. Having this rainbow mile that all of these Twin Cities Marathon runners are going to have to run through, whether they like it or not. And as they're running, think, wow, these people exist. In 2019, Brooks Running was the first running-specific brand to create any sort of apparel that allows runners to showcase, I am a queer runner, I'm wearing the Run Proud socks right now. And that's important because, you know, we talk about the importance of queer couples holding hands walking down the street, not for their sake, but for the little kid with his mom to be able to say, oh wow, there are queer people in my community. I can grow up and be that way. So I think the most important thing we can do right now is just representation. Just things like this panel that say, look, queer people exist and are part of this community. People having apparel and items that allow them to showcase their identity while they run, and races doing things specifically saying, gosh, if the future is queer, then we want to be on top of that future, so we need to somehow incorporate something in our event that acknowledges this community, not only to thrive as a race, but to survive in a demographic in a changing America.
So for people watching, people listening, or people who pick this up later, I think when they see the alphabet soup of LGBTQIA, they're like, oh, what, okay, that, I know that one, I know that one, I know that one. But I think that we still have a lot of people, not because they're coming from a place of hate, but be a bit unclear about some of us, especially in the non-binary sector, don't really know where to put us. And so why don't we explain the importance of that category and why maybe they're seeing it so much, and including in the running world, why it needed to be added. I mean, we see different states, including this one, allowing me to be who I am on my driver's license. This is only a logical step. So the inclusion of that category is not large. I was just reading in the Star Tribune yesterday or the day before, you know, Chicago does it. It's been here for a couple of years, but how important it is, I guess, to be able to even talk about it at the marathon level.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal to have a non-binary category. I think when you think and talk about running, it's a bunch of different health things coming together for people. It's what you put in your body. It's like the medical and healthcare systems that are able to support you to get you there on race day. I think to have a category is important because it shows how far we've come in Minnesota for trans healthcare, specifically access to gender-affirming hormones and surgeries in the state, and how we've made that accessible to runners, and how we can show up on race day in an environment that isn't always easy to show up in fully. I see the non-binary category in this race as kind of a reprieve from life that isn't always easy to navigate as a trans person. So I was very happy to see the category included in the race.
You know, for me, as a former runner, I wish I still was, but now I just chase a child. I remember running being the first safe place, because I could have my music and it could be whoever I was in my body, and my body could do amazing things when I put on my running shoes. And it was that way for 20 years. And I didn't have to worry about coming out or staying in. That was at least the space I got to be in. So to me, it's imperative that the running community come to terms with what running can do for an individual's mental health and how they feel about their own body. And it's a very personal relationship that one has. And so talk about, this is to me a logical next step. Like it or not, that's what running is to a lot of us. It was the first place we were ourselves. Ashley, I guess it's just you and I are just locking eyes. We're like, what is she talking about?
No, I like that you brought up the fact of like feeling safe running. I think that that's something that a lot of communities have struggled with in the outdoor space and the running space. And so I think that it's, you know, I'm so passionate about people voicing what it is that they need to feel safe in this space. What does that look like? What does that representation look like? What is the understanding that you need people to have? When I was doing all the work with Black Girls Run, it was explaining to people over and over, like, hey, we want to feel safe when, you know, we don't want you saying these certain things to us, or we don't want to be catcalled. And as a woman, this is what I need to feel safe in this space. As a queer woman, this is what I need to feel safe in this space. So I think that I'm just passionate about being able to communicate what those needs are to hopefully start to give people a better understanding. I'm trying to leave from a place of love and wanting people to understand who I am and why it's important. Running has changed my life in so many ways, and so I'm fortunate that I do feel, and many times I have felt safe in this space and felt like it's been inclusive. But I think that's of years of work of getting here.
Do you see any parallels in anything that we're talking about with Black Girls Run?
Oh, yes, 100%. I think that when we talk about inclusivity and spaces, I think it's for most marginalized groups. Most marginalized people have a story to tell of how they felt uncomfortable in these spaces, how they've felt uncomfortable in running groups and walking up to races. And, you know, when I first started running 20 years ago, it was, you know, predominantly a male, cisgender, male, white space, and it was not inclusive at all. And people would say, why are you here, when I go up to running groups to run? So I, you know, now as a queer person, you know, I understand that there's many times I don't feel safe. I was reading in your bio about running across Mississippi, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I would feel terrified for just being myself, and not to stereotype Mississippi, but just understanding that I've been so many places where I did not feel comfortable. That was just so brave of you. And it's so brave to take a stand and say, this is who I am. And I'm running and I'm doing this on behalf of other people who feel this way, so.
Yeah, now that, you know, this is often, now I thought about what I said too, and because of what you said, while it was freeing to me in my body, there can be like no other sport where you're really so vulnerable. I mean, you do a lot of your running when it's dark out, especially in Minnesota, and you're kind of out there for the world to see in your body. So I guess, Micah, what's it been like running in different parts of the world saying, I'm here, I'm queer, and I'm real fast, give me a beer. I don't have a ride.
I like that, actually.
I don't, you know what?
One of these
Micah,
brewing companies should take that from you and run with it. No pun intended. You know, it's interesting. So I've run across the state of Minnesota, run across the state of Mississippi, and run across my home state of Nebraska. And there is a gay slur that starts with an F that I'm not going to repeat here. But 4 miles into my run across Minnesota, a moving vehicle came by and some gentleman yelled that at me out the window. And I thought, well, that wasn't very Minnesota nice. And then the same thing happened in Nebraska. I was actually running with my straight childhood best friend, and he was running shirtless, and I had a shirt on, and somebody came by in a truck, and they said, put your shirt on, F word. And he was really shook by it. And we were running 15 miles that day, and I noticed that was mile number 1. after that, for the rest of the run, he kept looking over his shoulder like this. And I finally said, "What are you doing? Like, the beautiful scenery is in front of us. Why are you looking over your shoulder?" And he said, "Well, I don't want someone to hit us with their vehicle because they think we're gay." And it was one of the first times in his life where he realized, oh, someone might do physical violence against me because they think I'm gay, even though he's straight. And it was this light bulb for him of like the existence that we feel when we're a queer person running and thinking, ooh, is our gait a little too gay? As a person of color running and thinking, is someone going to attack me? I'm out here in the middle of nowhere by myself. And so I think it's unfortunate that in this athletic space where we should be thinking about our pace, our breath, our concentration, we're instead thinking, gosh, is someone gonna kill me just for existing? And so I think it's why events like this and having a Run Proud zone and announcing over the Expo Center that there's a Run Proud panel are so important, because it's telling those people, this is acceptable in our culture, this is part of our culture, and if you don't like that, then you can't be part of our culture. And running is going to be an inclusive community, and we're going to keep working towards that until we can all go running and think about our pace instead of what someone might do to us.
Yeah, and that makes me, I heard that announcement too, loud and clear. And I'm like, oh my gosh, when there's this part of you that will always say, oh my gosh, they're saying it out loud. Just put this in the back, it's fine, check the box. That's my, sometimes embarrassed to say, first reaction. It's pride with a little bit of fear. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I want to be safe. I want to go home safe. I'm so grateful that this is happening for our running community, but I'm still scared too. Scared about that 1 mile. I hope it's the best thing ever, and I can't wait to see people, and I want to take my family, and I know there's going to be a part of me that hopes nothing bad happens. And I hope there's a day where this panel doesn't have to exist, because we've done all of this. And it's just a part of the culture. But let's go back again to brands, to events. Twin Cities Marathon has done this. They've done the work. Allison did the work to get us on this panel to talk about this loud and proud to anybody that wants to listen. How can brands keep going? It's past the point of like, oh, well, we did that in 2023, or, here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, all of us know a lot about what happened in May of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered. And a lot of companies said they were going to change things and do things differently. And 3 years later, the receipts aren't there for a lot of them that said they were going to change. And so how do we ensure that change sticks even when it's hard and unpopular?
Starting with me. Yeah. I mean, I think that, personally, just stepping away, like taking off the Brooks hat, it's really holding brands accountable in terms of where are their dollars going in support. I think there's always a lot of lip service for people. They're saying, hey, yeah, we support you. I've put up this picture, or I've taken this picture with, my token friend here, or whatever that looks like. But having been in this space for a long time, it's about the accountability of where are the funds going to help support the causes that you say are so important to the brand? What are those groups that you're supporting? What are those nonprofits that you're supporting? Who are those individuals that you're supporting? A lot of times you'll see even brands kind of using people who in these spaces, and they will do photo shoots with them and all of the things, but not even pay for their time. That's unacceptable. So I think it's really about, putting your money where your mouth is.
So this year's theme of Pride was Elevate and Amplify. And the reason it was Elevate and Amplify, because I think it's incredibly important that our voices are heard and that we're not quiet. And so when we as a community speak up, speak out, and speak proud, the companies are forced to listen and forced to change. And I would say that they have to utilize the resources that they have and reach out and ask the questions. And I think sometimes companies are afraid to say, hey, we need help. How can I figure this out? And be a little humble and ask for the help. We're a community that we want you to change. We want you to be inclusive. And so as a community, we need to continue to be loud and to be proud and not be quiet. And then we need to help the brands carry forward.
Micah, you look like you're studying everybody's answer and you're about the truth bomb.
Well, I think it's two things. To make a news analogy, I heard Ari Shapiro speak, and he said, if we're in the NPR newsroom and there's not a sports fan in the editorial room, we're not going to cover sports in the news. And so in the same way, I think if there's not a queer person on the staff or on the board, or unfortunately many brands made a DEI committee and didn't have a queer person as part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion team. And so the first step has to be, we have to be in the room, we have to be on the staff, we have to be hired in these organizations so that the people making the decisions are including queer folk. The second thing that I think is so important is when Serena Williams retired, NPR, I'm an NPR nerd, sorry, interviewed all of these black female tennis players and said, why did you start playing tennis? And all of them were like, I saw Serena Williams. She was on a poster in my room. I had a hero, I had a Michael Jordan to look up to. And now Coco Gauff just won the US Open, another black female. And so I think the brands have to say, it's not enough just to have a panel. We need to have a queer person on a poster. And so the brands need to spend the money not just to check the box and say our diversity and equity inclusion statement said we'd do something, but the brands have to say we need a queer person on a poster, we need to elevate that person that high, because again, 1/5 of Gen Z, your largest market, is going to want that poster. And so if you want to stay solvent as a business, we need to make queer heroes, not just have a panel.
Yeah, and I would add something real quick to that. I would say that we need queer, trans, people of color in positions of leadership that have decision-making capabilities, and we need to pay them for their time appropriately. And we can always do better. We should always be looking to have open feedback to make our organizations, our events more inclusive. It's an ongoing thing. So, yeah.
No, that's great. I think that when we talk about brands, we had a very ouchy situation with Target here in the Twin Cities based in Minneapolis. And I was thinking about that and thinking about, unfortunately, Bud Light. And then I'm thinking, you know, what you're saying though, Micah, that would just focused on the past. And we've seen the mistakes made. We've seen people choose us and not choose us when capitalism got a little bit too ouchy. We're talking about choosing us for real. Don't pander. And here's what I think, at least my experience in the Twin Cities in the last decade and as a runner in this community way back when, is that the actual people, not the CEOs, which are important in a different conversation, but the people in this room and watching this, they say, what can I do as an individual runner in this community to say yes to this and make sure it keeps going, and how can we support and let our voices be heard so that the organization knows that the popular vote is behind us and supports us? What can the individual runner do?
I'm happy to take this just because I'm going to plug the happy hour that we're doing at Summit Brewing at 4 o'clock. Because specifically after George Floyd happened, I asked myself this question, none of us can solve racism, none of us can solve homophobia, but we can all put a pin on our shirt or put a sticker on our water bottle. And so the run across I did in Minnesota was to launch this Outside Safe Space program, which is a symbol that I ask individuals to put on them when they're in outdoor, rural, and athletic spaces to show that we have way more people who are supportive than maybe post on social media angry comments. And so I think any way that an individual can visibly communicate that they're an ally is so important. And at the 4 o'clock happy hour at Summit, Brooks Running actually is giving away 100 of the stickers and pins to the first people who show up. So if you want one of those for free, come to Summit Brewing at 4 p.m. and that allows you as an individual to showcase that you're an ally with this Outside Safe Space symbol and be part of that not silent majority, hopefully. At least here in Minnesota, it feels like we're a majority to change.
I want to ask if you have any questions, because sometimes those spark the most interesting conversations. And we have one already. I'm going to run this mic to you. This will be the most running I do all day.
Thanks. This question is for Ashley. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most proudest things about Black Girls Run?
Oh, yeah. There were so many moments that I definitely am proud of with BGR. I mean, I think it was just the sheer numbers of women that we were able to empower and encourage to get out there. I think it was being that force of representation. We've talked about that a lot on the panel today, how important it is for people to see people like them doing the things, and then they can start to feel safe, or they can find someone to do the thing with and feel that safety. I think it's staying power. It's still going strong. So those are a couple of things I'm really proud of.
And panelists, if you have a question for another panelist, that always gets very interesting. If you have one up in front of the whole public to ask. Anyone? Anyone else? Yes.
Hello, I'm Lisa. I know you guys talked a lot about inclusivity and my question and being welcoming, and then Micah just talked about, you know, showing up. And are there characteristics of a good ally that you'd like to impart to the audience for us to be thinking about and acting on?
So my biggest thing for an ally is be an ally when there isn't a queer person present. That is the biggest thing. You can be an ally standing next to all of us and being like, well, that's not right, or advocating, but be that ally when we're not around. Because that's where the difference starts to be made, is when you continue that allyship throughout everything in your life. That's how we move forward.
This particular panel, I was in my newsroom, I was like, this is really cool and interesting. And these are stories that aren't often told. I'm glad the Star Tribune did that story, but there's two things going on. You know, you need that ally to be active. You know, when you hear that F word said in a group, we're on this run, God forbid, you be the one to say it. You be the one to stop it. We need to be in the room to bring our voices, to bring the ideas, but we also don't have to be in the room to put out every single fire that is lit on our identities.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I think it's something very, I don't know, supportive of when, you know, you're not in the room and someone speaks up on your behalf. That feels like true support, true love, a true way of understanding, saying, I understand this person. I may not go through it myself or having, you know, had that experience, but I'm able to speak up. I'm able to ask them the questions and have the conversation so that when I do speak up, I'm able to represent them in the correct way. So I think that was brilliant, like you said.
It is, and I think we saw again this year, you know, that the consequence of performative allyship hurts more than if you just would have shut up in the first place. Because the pain caused by Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light, was far greater by both their inaction and acting like they'd never seen us before. And who called you? I didn't know about that. Was worse than then don't include us, because it was a token that you weren't really willing to stand up for. And the same goes for individual people. You know, I know that my rabbi always says, you know, a tenet of our faith is there's like a tiered system, right? If you give, you know, $500 to Black Girls Run, it doesn't need. Does Black Girls Run need to know it comes from you? Do you need to post you know, that anonymous gift is so meaningful, because then the gift just speaks for itself, and Black Girls Run decides what to do with the money, not what you say needs to be done with your $500 to give to that organization. There's a different kind of just real altruism there, and speaking up for us when we're not present. And those, I think, where people reveal their true homophobia or their racism or their Islamophobia or transphobia, is when we're not there. That's when the worst gets said about us. And so we need people that love us truly and deeply and see us as true equals, and not as a bumper sticker to say, this stops here in these spaces.
Yeah, great. I think also we can evolve the conversation around allyship. I think for the longest time, allies have come to mean straight, cis people who want to be better allies, but I think the queer community can be better allies to itself. I remember when I came out as a lesbian when I was 18, 19 years old. That went over okay with my parents, and then it was a completely different game when I came out as trans to them. And also I had a lot of gay friends who just were not quite sure if I was making the right choice because of maybe some of their internalized transphobia that they held. So I think that when we talk about allyship and being better allies for one another, it's everyone's responsibility to do better, to have these hard conversations with ourselves so that we can show up for one another.
Such an important point, Micah. Thank you so much. That isn't talked about enough, and it's just extremely important. Something else, because we were joking about it before we started our panel, some of us have kids on this panel, and I think about all of these things now as a family union, for my wife and my child and I. And it's not just me against the world, or me being, dragged down on social media or trolled and whatever, or having all the things that have happened just to me. They happen to my wife and then to my child, who's not even 2. So I think about that 1 mile space, and I think about your running and your programming and your participation, Micah, and this part of the marathon happening. It's not just about the individual person. This will impact my family and how my child sees the Twin Cities Marathon for the first time, what it's supposed to look like. And so kind of think outside of ourselves a little bit about how this affects our kids too, and just younger people in general, not just us as individuals.
I always think about that kid who lives in rural Minnesota who's too afraid to come out because of the retaliation. And I think about spaces that we set up. I think about Twin Cities Pride. I think about this Rainbow Mile. I think about our Family Fun Day. Those are places that kid gets to be their true authentic self and feel like they're amongst family. I always joke, when you walk into Pride, nobody cares who you are. You're family. That's what it is. You're family. And so, I've got 2 little kids too, and I think about it, and I think about what are they seeing? What hate are they seeing along that race route? Are they seeing people cheering other ones on? Are they, hearing slurs? Because my kids have heard it. I know my kids have heard it. And so what are we teaching our kids? Just don't forget, there's someone, a youth watching you and watching what you do. And it becomes so important that we show up.
You have kids, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm constantly communicating to them how important it is for them to feel seen and heard, and for them to show that same respect to other people. And so I don't know that I've fully processed all the time, what they're taking in and what they're hearing other people say, but I, constantly go back to, in our house, this is how we treat other people. So I don't know, I'm enjoying your perspective, and I don't know. It's a good question though. Yeah.
My friend of mine, she and her wife have 3 kids, and they only know one gender, and it's gender fabulous. I highly recommend that. We're all just gender fabulous. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But if you want to add that category, the 4 of us will run in it.
I'm going to borrow that.
Gender fabulous. Works every time. And it's fun to say. Any other questions? Yeah. That's okay. You don't want the microphone?
You can leave, but
You want to Minnesota whisper it in?
I'm very loud, but probably the microphone's better. Thank you all for being here. I don't have to shout because I have the microphone. I'm a runner and an educator. I teach kindergarten, so I teach the little bitty babies. Thank you. I don't know if there's anything. I love what you're talking about youth and kids, because kindergarten kids say things that are hurtful. And so if there's any advice that I can share with my fellow educators, I think I say all the right things. I don't say gender fabulous. I may steal that. But just, is there anything you can recommend that's a great way to approach in a classroom setting or with kids? Something that is wiser than I have to say. Just anything.
I will say, so I do a segment for Kare 11 where I interview small children, usually kindergarten, first grade, and I've probably done it 150 times over the last 7 years. I will come to your school. I would say way more than half the time, one of the kids in the group gets up the gumption to ask my gender because they really don't know. They genuinely don't know. And their teacher and or principal in some cases it's gone all the way to parents. I mean, they freak out. I'm not saying you do, but they freak. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I feel like it's okay because I respond like, well, what do you think? And they're like, I genuinely don't know. And then I'm kind of like looking at them, I'm like, can we keep going here on what that is? So they do, at least in my experience. I actually had one kindergartner correct another kindergartner because one kid said, well, do you argue? The topic was, what do you do when you argue with somebody? And the kid's like, well, what happens when you argue with your husband? And the other kindergartner ran over, he's like, you mean wife? And the other kid's like, what? Like mine was blown right there. But I find them to be painfully honest. Yeah, but sometimes the sad truth on the other side is, what do they hear at home about us? And then what can you do at the school, depending on which district you're in? How much can you say? It's a good question.
I think don't hide from it. The first time someone says something that's either misgendering or derogatory or whatever, don't hide from it. Because the minute you ignore it, there's that other kid watching, right? Who maybe is going to end up being that way. And so I know my first grader will very much correct people because she has a trans dad, right? And I'm mom, I'm dad, I'm mom, dad. Sometimes I'm hey you, depending on how mad they are at me. But I think if we ignore it, which sometimes we have a tendency to do, right? Because it's an uncomfortable conversation. But if you just simply turn and say, hey, there's lots of different genders, right? And don't ignore it. Some kid is going to hear that and then know you're a safe space. And that's what's important, is those kids to know that their teachers and their folks in school are a safe space.
I think to piggyback what has been said, don't underestimate the power of small things, of maybe seeing one of your nieces or nephews and not saying, do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but saying, are you dating someone? Or of one of your friends using the wrong pronouns as someone and saying, hey, they go by they, them. Or these small things that we forget that we show up every day for. And an example I want to share is Twin Cities Pride is the first Pride March that I ever participated in 2010. And it inspired me to look more at the Twin Cities. I didn't grow up here, and when I was considering moving here, I learned about you as an out journalist who is respected in the Twin Cities, and I thought, gosh, well, if they have Jana Shortal, who is so well respected, that must be a welcoming community. So I moved here, and then I ran across Minnesota with the support of Brooks Running, who was willing to put their neck out in a way other brands weren't. And I've gotten to meet all these wonderful Minnesotans who are doing work with organizations like yours, who are helping keep that community going. All of you came and chose to sit down at the Run Proud panel and be a physical presence of people who heard that announcement, and if no one was sitting there, it would have made it look like we weren't welcome. And so I think all of us in our own lives, in the little ways that we show up, whether it's wearing a rainbow headband while you're running this weekend or cheering during the Rainbow Mile instead of a different portion, don't forget that we all make a huge impact with the little things we do. And I know that students say now their number one job they want to be when they grow up is a social media influencer. Don't forget that each of us is an influencer in every little step that we take, every word that we say, every time we show up in our regular daily lives, because it's those little actions that when all combined are going to make a huge collective difference.
Right? I mean, it's 2:53. He gives the closing speech. What the hell am I supposed to talk about now, Mike?
I'm a Lutheran pastor's kid, so I grew up thinking, you gotta leave them with good news.
Did you see that hip tub? Like, I'm a Lutheran pastor's kid.
I should add, not only a Lutheran pastor's kid, but at one point my dad's church was the largest Lutheran campus ministry in America, and he got the award for being the best Lutheran campus pastor, and he has a gay son. So for all the Lutherans out there hearing that, you can be Lutheran and fabulous too.
How are you not from here? So ridiculous. All right, any Lutheran fabulous centric questions? You had a question, right?
Yeah. I'm curious to hear how you guys react to things that make you super angry, but are trying to approach it with grace. Because I find that sometimes I get so pissed and then I become a little combative. and that doesn't really serve my purpose very well. And with some of your more public than me, because I'm rather private, but how do you approach that with grace but effectively and not become a doormat?
Why are you looking at me?
I feel like everybody's looking at me. It's really hard. I'm not gonna lie. There are times that me and my staff have gone into some secluded rooms and had some very choice words to say, right? But we always turn around, and I think what I try to look at is if I react that way and I don't try to fix it, then it's gonna stay, right? I'll give you a prime example. Anthony Edwards, Minnesota Timberwolves, right? We could have boycotted the Minnesota Timberwolves easily. And instead, I said, hey, let's chat. Let's sit down and let's have a conversation. I sat down with him, I sat down with this manager, and I said, listen, this is the impact that you made. Now, I could have turned my back. I could have said lots of choice words to him, which I did. But I looked at him as a I think he's 21 now, 20-year-old kid, and said, you didn't get it. And let me help you get it. And let me help you understand. And so it's hard, I'm not gonna lie, it's really hard not to say those things that you want to. But if we get mad and we don't try to change the narrative, we'll never win. It's that simple. We'll never win.
I can just share this because this just happened like a week ago. I was at Kol Nidre services the night before Yom Kippur at my synagogue, and my rabbi started talking about anger. It's like the most important thing of the year, and it's about anger. And I'm like, oh man. And statistic after statistic, Mayo Clinic says people self-report being angry twice a day, which means that we're really angry 15 times a day because we're not honest about it. And that America's angrier than it's ever been. We're more divided than we've ever been. And then she went in, I'm like, whoa, there's gotta be some hope here. I'm not gonna be rolling into 5784 this pissed. And she talked about the difference between that anger is a natural emotion, and some of it's really good, and it can be like eruptive anger, destructive anger, the road rage kind of anger, the damn it kind of anger. Well, where does that get you? I'm not talking to this important basketball player, but maybe there's a learning opportunity if you allow yourself to breathe just a second. And then the other anger is the anger that I hope you keep in your pocket all the time, and that is righteous anger. That is anger at seeing injustice in the world and saying, I need to be that ally in the room, or I see something wrong here, I see someone who needs and I do not. And so some anger is good. And what if you took that breath after you're hurt, after you perhaps are the victim, and you put it in your pocket and it comes back out as righteous anger? What are you gonna do about it? Are you just gonna put on that sticker and you're gonna put your chest back a little bit more? Are you going to demand a little bit more out of your employer for not just like performative XYZ? Are you going to stand up for yourself? Are you going to stand up for your community? Are you going to just live better that day? I think you can. It sounds hokey, but it's worked for me. When I came into the job I have now, I've been at this TV station for 20 years, but 7 years ago, I had a choice to make one night, and I was angry and I was hurt. And I talked from my space of hurt, and it changed my life. Not overnight, but over time. And it allowed me to become who I am. For the first 13 years I was on your TV screens, I was lying to you about who I was. I was afraid of you. I was afraid that you would make fun of me. And I was angry about that inside. Until I got to the point where I learned what righteous anger was, and that was just really truth-telling and being a good person. And bad things will happen, but there's a way to use it. There is a way to use it. Very quiet in here.
If it adds any levity to the moment,
Here comes the Lutheran pastor.
yeah. Well, you might have heard of this movie called Titanic. It was really big in the 90s.
But there was enough room on the door.
There was. There totally was. And you know, when Celine sang that song, she got super famous, and Saturday Night Live came out with the Celine Dion show, and they were lampooning her. And they interviewed her, and I have this video saved on my phone as a reminder when stuff like this happens. They interviewed her and they said, "What do you think about the Celine Dion show on Saturday Night Live?" And she said, "You know, I watched it and I thought to myself, if they're doing these things and saying these things about me, then I must be doing something right." And so I think when people say those things about you, when people come at us with these hurtful things, it's because we as a queer community, we're doing something right. And unfortunately, in doing all those, I don't want to say right things, but in reclaiming our rights and in being visible, it is going to make people react and react in negative ways, but we're winning the war. And so when people say those things to you, just remember you're doing something right, and that's why they're saying those things about you.
Side note, I once went to a Celine Dion concert like 5 years ago, and it was the gayest place I'd ever been. No clue. Me and my mom are like, ugh. I thought we were gonna rip through some Titanic hits here, and this is a like full-on drag show. It was so great. So go check it out. Any other questions? That's a hard pass from the Minnesotans in the crowd. They're ready to run. I want to thank all of you for this conversation. I feel better. I mean, I'm canceling therapy later. We done did it. And Minnesotans, for those that are Minnesotan on the panel, you know, but for those who are not, some people might just come ask you questions after we're done because folks are shy around here. Thank you all for being here and listening to this panel. Thank you to Allison. Thank you to the Twin Cities Marathon, not just for giving us a place to enter the race, but for creating a space to know that we're safe to run there and be here. So we really appreciate it.